Welcome to Tantrums and Tabletops. My name is Russ Sheath, and for this week's interview, we've got a really special guest, Ben Garwood. Ben Garwood has operated at the highest levels of the British military, with the Parachute Regiment, with the Pathfinders, and with the famed SAS. Since leaving the military, Ben formed his own company, HR4K, and has ventured into the world of comic book writing with his new book, Groundhammer. We talked to Ben about Groundhammer, his plans to expand his new brand, and everything about incorporating some of the real life heroes that he worked with during his time in the military into his comic book stories. We really hope you enjoy this week's episode. Ben Garwood, welcome to Tantrums and Tabletops. How are you, sir?
Very well, thank you, mate. Very well. Thank you for the invite.
No, my pleasure. Thank you for joining us. Folks, if you don't know who Ben Garwood is, you will after watching this podcast. Ben is tell me if I've missed anything out here, a veteran, an entrepreneur, a business owner, which I suppose ties into entrepreneurship, and also a comic book writer. Of all those things, I'm guessing that being a comic book writer probably wasn't on the list that long ago. So, Ben, tell us about yourself, and tell us about the path that led you to your new comic book, Groundhammer.
Okay, so I've always divided people up into two types of categories, and there's tradesmen and there's craftsmen. It's an analogy I use all the time, and I often think there are some people who are very good at following structure and routine in their lives, and there are other people who like to create and have the opportunity to own something, and certainly in my career, have an opportunity to have a seat at the table, if you like. Throughout my career in the military, I've always wanted to be creative in having responsibility, in having a chance to kind of be in the planning processes and being involved in whatever we're getting amongst. And I think that's run true throughout everything I've kind of done. I think then leaving the military, I then again wanted something that was my own instead of working for someone else, and I needed that sort of creative outlet. From building a business and then seeing where this sort of took me. Before I knew it, I was creating backstories for brands, and then to build brands, and then that sort of led me into sort of creating this sort of comic book story, which I kind of wrote one Christmas. But I sort of bring it back a little bit. When I went to military school. When I left military school, I applied for art college, and I got into art college on my portfolio. I had no qualifications, got in on my portfolio. I then realised it wasn't for me, and I joined the Paras. But I still had that artistic sort of characteristics in my personality. I love music. I love the creativeness of what art sort of brings people and how it brings people together. And I think definitely that side of my personality, where I couldn't necessarily have a creative outlet in the military, as in for art or producing art, I found I was creative in the way I conducted myself in the military. The way I could plan things, how I could be a better soldier, how I could hunt bad guys, how I could do these things. And that was my medium, that was my outlet, my creative outlet. As I went through my career, I realized that if I stayed in the regular army, I was going to be really restricted on how creative I could be. I then eventually joined a unit called the Pathfinders, which is a reconnaissance platoon within the 16 Air Assault Brigade. There I had a lot more freedom of movement. I felt like I was contributing a lot more. It still wasn't enough. And then I applied for selection to join the SAS. And it was there where I was given more and more responsibility, and having more responsibility meant I craved even more, but I felt like I was actually contributing to the mission, and I was being able to be really creative, not only in just essentially manhunting, but also just being able to develop and improve the units that I was with. I set my business up, Russ, while I was in HR4K. I set that up while I was in, and that helped me as my transition, which then opened many, many doors for me. And that's kind of where you and I end up getting to talk to each other a few years ago when I got out. Yeah, so it's kind of evolved from there, really. One of the things I always wanted to do is to give back. I wanted to create products or do something. So HR4K stands for, it's an anagram of 4 kilometers an hour, which is the speed at which a Special Forces soldier candidate goes over the mountains. I wanted to use that business to give back to the organizations that supported me and my family and also my friends. And with that, we end up creating a beer. And I love beer, like most of us do. And I want to give proceeds from that beer back in. And we were trying to choose a name for the beer, and we chose the name Groundhammer. Hammer was the gunship, the AC-130 gunship that used to protect us. It was like a guardian angel that flew above us and firing great big cannons at bad guys. It was our guardian angel. And we had a friend of ours who was called the Groundhammer because he was equally as devastating on the ground as that gunship was in the air. So when we were looking to create the beer, we were thinking of a really cool name, and we just thought, let's call it Groundhammer. So it's a wicked name. Let's call it Groundhammer. So as we were creating Groundhammer, the idea was we were going to put proceeds back into the SAS Association, and then, but I wanted to be creative. What I wanted to do was pay homage to real heroes, real operations, real events. And maybe I could do that in the way I brand the Groundhammer beer and how I market it, which kind of led me thinking, well, if I write a backstory and I can almost use a sort of escapism with the backstory, then maybe it's a great way of selling something and enjoying something while still highlighting some real people and real heroes. And I sat down at Christmas 2 years ago. Next thing you know, I'm creating a story about titans and planets and portals and all kinds of stuff. And I think what I did is I just drawn everything I ever loved as a kid and grew up with, and so just created this, I don't know, mix of just, I don't know, a love child of Highlander and, I don't know, Stargate. You know, probably not the best analogy, but certainly Highlander for sure. But yeah, it was just pure fun. And next thing you know, we're talking, we're doing stuff together. We've got Comic-Cons running here in Hereford. We've got motorbikes being built for us by Crazy Horse, Indian motorcycles being built. We've had songs written for the Groundhammer, called Groundhammer by Kinstrife. You know, we even got in front of, you know, some decent producers. You know, we're now producing our 4th comic. So yeah, bit of a long slaughter there, bit of a I probably need to start breathing now, but generally that's the opening of where we got to this point.
A lot to unpack there, Ben. I mean, let's take it all the way back. So HR4K is your business, your sort of core business. It's something obviously I'm familiar with. When I sort of describe it to people, hopefully I'm not doing it a disservice at all here, but I describe it as the ultimate man cave. But it's more than that, isn't it? So can you describe HR4K as a business, and then how, you know, we've talked about Groundhammer, the comic coming out of a beer, which is part of your HR4K business. But tell us about HR4K.
When we first started HR4K, which was done out of my garage while I was still serving in the SAS, we were really struggling online because we were competing against everyone. A lot of people pretended to be people they weren't. Obviously, we were I was in a job at the time that I couldn't tell people what I did. And I was getting more and more frustrated by the amount of people that were online pretending to be me or people who do what I do to sell products and services that was a lie. So we decided to go to bricks and mortar, find a building. We found an old Second World War ammunition factory in Hereford, and we built like you said, essentially the ultimate man cave. We filled it, and the idea was to create that sense of escapism by creating a venue that doesn't look like work, doesn't look like home. You can go in there and just get away, meet up with a friend, meet new friends, just go in there and feel like a rock star. We filled it with cool stuff, memorabilia from my past, memorabilia from friends' place. We put two tattoo studios in there. We got motorbikes in there. We have live bands. We do bikes, booze, burgers, and tattoo nights. We do Oktoberfest. As I said, we're about to do our second Comic Con in there. So HR4K, a brand, a reseller of a lot of veteran brands, but really it's a community-focused business designed to bring people from all different demographics to meet who share a very similar ethos of contribution, family, good values, which I think we're often missing these days. So that's what we did. And then by doing that, by creating these very sort of community-focused venue, means that good things fall out of it. Good people talk to each other. Good people get to know each other. Networking happens. Opportunities fall out of that, personal and business as well. So, yeah, it's kind of epic. It's a lot of work because a lot of effort goes into it by creating such diverse kind of events and different things to bring different communities together. But ultimately, the people are all very, very similar, and that's because we share a common ethos. So that's kind of what HR4K is. And you can check out HR4K, www.hr4k.uk if you're interested. It's also on Instagram as well, HR4K.
Cool. And the interesting thing coming out of that, as you touched on, is the comic side of things. So there's the comic as it relates to the beer, and as you've created Groundhammer the comic. But I certainly know in talking to you as we've prepared for the interview that actually the comic thing's kind of become a life of its own, hasn't it? So you mentioned there a convention, and tell us a bit about QCon.
So QCon's set up by a guy called Andy Cumber, who runs Q Comics here in Hereford. He's an old friend of mine. He was in the Paras with me. He was trying to grow his business and expand the sort of his own brand, his own business as well. And then so what we did is we decided to work together, use my venue. I help promote him, and in exchange, he helps me develop and create and drive my comic and the sales. It was a world that I really didn't understand, comics and everything else in it. I knew I enjoyed what I like. I knew it was a great way of bringing good people together. And I knew it was a great form of escapism, but I didn't really know all the nuances and everything else that comes with it. So Andy's been real supportive of that. And then together we thought, well, let's do QCon. Let's do something where we can promote Groundhammer, and we can also promote his business, and we can also support a lot of the other small businesses in the Herefordshire area and help sort of showcase them as well. And we knew that if we do that, good things are going to fall out. We did that, and we ended up meeting Keith Burns. Keith Burns is a world-famous artist who's involved with some of the stuff with Garth Ennis, 2000 AD, Commander Comics with yourself. And he's helped us out. He's done a variant cover for one of our comics. So he's there. It's a great personality that's come involved. Also, a gentleman called Brian, who's behind, Brian Muir, who's behind, he created and invented the Darth Vader look, helmet, and also the Stormtrooper looks. He's got involved through him. He's hooked us up with the guys behind the Mandalorian and the Trooper costume designs, who've now built us helmets and stuff like this. So by opening yourself up, being prepared to network, amazing things have happened. and it's just grown and grown. So I think we're looking to get anything between 1,000 to 2,000 people at this next QCon, which happens on the 29th and 30th of this month.
And that's going to be at HR4K in Hereford.
Yep. Yeah, HR4K in Hereford. Yeah, you can find us, as I said, through on Instagram. You can also look at QCon as well, or Q Comics via Instagram or Facebook, and then you'll also find more information there as well. But yeah, awesome. It's good fun. As I said earlier, I think by looking at the different possibilities and how we can bring people together who also share an interest in comics, and sci-fi and everything else, and also just looking at people like you and I of our age group. Well, we love comics. We loved all that. So by bringing in other genres and other groupings that share the same passion, music, motorbikes, cars, all of us, reason why we love these things is because I don't know, we get on them, we enjoy them, we feel like rock stars. And actually I find that there's a lot of people who like bikes and cars also like comics and vice versa. So yeah, it's all hand in hand, and we get to do a job that we all love. You finish on a Friday and look forward to a Monday.
Absolutely, yeah. So was young Ben Garwood, before the Parachute Regiment, before the SAS, were you a comic book guy as a kid growing up?
A little bit. I mean, I loved my 2000 AD Road Trooper. I loved all that stuff when I was younger. I suppose, again, I loved losing myself in the sort of comics and, in the early, Saturday morning cartoons and everything else that we got into. I think I was very lucky growing up. I was born in the late 70s. I was very lucky growing up through the 80s and the 90s, being able to, when sort of all that sort of animation and films and everything, all that comics sort of came to life. And I suppose that's kind of always stuck with me. I'm actually more of a bigger fan of things like medieval kind of genre, your Games of Thrones, your Viking stuff and everything else. But all of that to me, and I know I've used the word a lot now, but that idea of escapism, of losing yourself somewhere else. And I think it's important to now and again just decompress, just get away, just relax and lose yourself in something else, in a fantasy world, an idea, something you don't really have to think too hard about, but you can enjoy that wherever that journey takes you. So I think even as I grew up, and then as I spent the time in the military, I would still find myself, when I needed to decompress, when I needed 5 minutes, or when I needed to lose myself, I would just lose myself in sci-fi. I talk about Stargate. Stargate obviously used to be on at what time? 5 o'clock in the afternoon, something like that. I know, 6 o'clock in the afternoon. If we were in normal sort of daily routine back in camp, I'd come home, we'd have a busy day, and then I'd just get on the couch and just lose myself in a TV program. I just needed half an hour, 40 minutes just to decompress.
Mm.
And, and I think that's carried on. So now, where I don't necessarily have the time to sit there and watch, great big box sets or anything else. Now I've got kids, and now I'm trying to run multiple businesses. I think now creating a comic, I can now lose myself in something we're now creating. We can take ourselves in the directions we want to go into. It's fun.
And that's really interesting, isn't it?
Best thing about it is meet lots of cool people.
Absolutely. So going back to sort of your own sort of history with art, you sort of mentioned there about going to art college. So where did that passion for art come from? Comics as a youngster? Was there another element of art that sort of drew you in, thinking maybe, I can make a career of this? And then what happened to take you off towards the Paras?
Probably realizing I wasn't actually any good at it. I don't know. I suppose growing up, I used to draw. Started off doing the classic stuff, bird books and drawing birds and garden birds and all that other sort of stuff that came with it. And then showing that probably I was a little bit better at drawing and being creative than some of the people in the class, which often gives you a bit of a spur on to try and be even better. Through my teenage years, I got into music. I used to go to a lot of festivals and a lot of gigs, and I started kind of getting into sort of, I don't know, like culture, like going to art museums, going to theatres and everything else like that. And it was something that certainly me and my mates were into. We were more of an alternative scene growing up. And there was something about the artist Modigliani that sort of captured my imagination, and I loved the sort of romantic side of that art, and I suppose that's where I got really, really interested in art and all its different formats. I tried doing my own version of sort of cubism and all the other stuff that comes with that sort of artwork. And I thought I'd give it a go, see if I could get into college doing art and learn more about it. I think I was more interested in what art was as a whole, as opposed to actually being able to be creative. As opposed to actually being able to produce my own art. I really liked being involved in it as opposed to actually being any good at producing it. And then, I don't know, something just kind of switched off really, and I realised I needed to kind of get a grip on myself. I'd been kind of cutting around doing my own detail for a while, and I just thought, sod it, I'll go join the army. It was absolutely, completely, left of field, and I went and joined the Reg. But actually what I did find is, I think with the way I grew up through my teenage years and the people I met and going to all these gigs and festivals and theatres and everything else, and being loosely involved in art, I actually found that it made me more of a rounded person going on, because I was able to, I was able to sort of converse with different people from different backgrounds. I was able to find sort of common ground. I didn't have this sort of stereotypical kind of squaddy attitude where really, you're a little bit solid. You're not really cultured. You're not really sort of speaking to anyone else that doesn't look or feel or talk like you, and actually, I thought that made me a better soldier. That made me better at what I did. It made me able to work in all different environments with different people and everything else. So I'm really grateful of that. But as I said, I think there was that creative side in me, and I think I still needed to find that, whatever that medium was. And for me, I certainly think over that period of time within the military, that medium was being able to be better at, soldiering, manhunting, being better at working on essentially a black economy, working where most things are against you. You don't necessarily have the resources or the support in those environments, so you had to be creative. And I relish that. I think towards the back end of my career, though, Russ, I realised that after a while you get posted and promoted, not because you're the best at the job, but actually because it's time for you to move on. And I realised that at some point you're no longer going to be doing the sexy side of the soldier, and eventually you're going to take a desk job. Eventually you're going to go and doing all these. You realise you are just a number or a person. So actually leaving and finding my own path with HR4K, as I said, was an opportunity for me to carry on being creative and build something, and I love it. I've got absolute freedom of movement. I can do whatever I want, when I want, and it's brilliant. And I can bring people in and we can do some cool shit. I think I've got the best job in the world, really.
And
Because
that's really
you get to do
interesting.
what you want to do, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's
Yeah.
yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for being your own boss, especially coming from. It's interesting because I think people have a very maybe slightly outdated sort of cliche view of the military as being a place where you certainly aren't your own boss, but you've operated in units where individual, what's the word, self-reliance is absolutely key. So at points you absolutely have to be your own boss because maybe there's not someone there to make decisions for you in the way that maybe people think of the military. So drawing upon that creativity from art and from your experiences before going into the army, carrying that through to the absolute pinnacle of of a military career, and then into your own business is really interesting to me. And then how that's kind of filtered into Groundhammer, your comic, and then almost sort of coming back full circle to the kind of creativity, the sitting down with a pen and a piece of paper and just your imagination, as you would have done when you were creating art, is really interesting. So
Yeah.
let's talk a bit about Groundhammer, the comic itself. So it's called Groundhammer. Tell us a bit about the story and especially about the characters that we can encounter in the new book.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I want to highlight real heroes and real operations, but obviously I don't want to give away any sensitive information. And I thought a really good way of paying homage to those boys and girls from all different units that I've worked with, operations I've been on, and various militaries from different countries was to create this story where I can kind of bring those characters into or elements of their characters, tell their stories, but in like a completely sci-fi way, as to not to give away, as I said, that sort of sensitive information. But we can absolutely have a lot of fun with it, and I think it's a nice little nod to them. The Regimental Association has supported this comic. We're now allowed to put the SAS cat badge on the back of the comic, which is a big move for us, or for anyone really. And obviously we're keen to kind of keep the regiment and special forces in a positive light publicly for that. So, and obviously any support goes back into supporting anyone who's worked within the groups and their families. I also thought the comic allows us to kind of bring in lots and lots of other elements into it. So not only can we sort of highlight individuals, but we can also tell the backstories of certain groupings, like the Gurkhas. How are they involved in the British Army? What's their heritage? How did they get involved? The Fijians, what's their heritage? How did that start? How did they serve? When did they first serve in the British military? Further down the line, we'll bring in my friends that are in Delta Force, Navy SEALs, some of the Danish, Norwegian, and other SOF units as well, Aussies and Kiwis. And we can kind of bring in them. We can also then highlight the history of those units and then some of the characters of how we were inspired. So some of these guys who are sadly maybe killed in action, how do we tell their story? How do we promote them and keep their name alive, really? And that's kind of what we want to do with this. Just going back a bit, Russ, actually, thinking about it now is one of the greatest things I found when I was in Special Forces was being always, as I said, having a seat at the table, being involved in the planning process and having a problem given to me. And then once I've got the problem right, how do I find this person? How do I get to that position? How do I retrieve this? Whatever the mission was. And then I'd write an estimate and I'd come up with a plan on how I would do it. But I wouldn't do this on my own. I would obviously have a team around me, people with experience and everything else. And then what I would do is I would lean on a number of attachments or detachments, people with skill sets, subject matter experts, everything from intelligence units, assets, intelligence assets. I would look at engineers who have understanding of topographical maps and mapping and different forms of mapping. I look at signals units on how I could communicate in those environments. What is the atmospherics of the environment you're working in, ground intelligence, locals around there, history, past experiences, all these different things you bring into this estimate. I love the fact that you were there almost orchestrating this whole piece to eventually get you to an end state, which is obviously mission success, the fruition for where you're going to go to. And I love that about Ground Hammer. Ground Hammer is you have this idea in your head, you have this estimate, how I'm going to execute this, and how do I lean on people who know far more than I do on how to execute that, on how to deliver that. So you're almost like a conductor in an orchestra. So I can now lean on really good artists to produce that, their knowledge and their experience from other comics, how they produce that. Yourself, Russ, how you can take a story and how do you network and how do you know the right people to talk to and how do you market your product? Then I've got Mike who does all the producing. How do I then turn that into a physical product? How do I turn that into something that people can then read? So it's very similar. I almost see this as an operation. So actually, when I execute this, I still feel like I can bring in certain elements and the storylines of my background and how it kind of flows. So there is a constant theme going through that, which is that sort of SF-esque kind of feel throughout, which is good fun, really.
I've read the first few issues. Is that it's a military book, but it's certainly not a military book. It's wrapped up in a sci-fi theme. So those things you're talking about the heritage of some of the units you've worked with, certainly some of the individuals and people you've worked with. It's wrapped up in a sci-fi theme, but there are strong military elements of that. Can you tell us a little bit about the sci-fi story and about the overall sort of the fiction of Groundhammer?
Yeah, sure. I didn't actually go out my way to write essentially a universe. What I knew that if I kept my story fairly narrow, I would be limited in the direction of travel I could go to. I needed a start point, and I almost looked at the Big Bang, the initial idea of creation. I've always loved the idea of the origins of certain things. A few years ago, I was obsessed with understanding the origins of Christianity and religion and all kinds of stuff. I ended up joining the Freemasons, and I got to my third degree in Freemasons, and the idea was I wanted to know the origins of Christianity and Catholicism and everything else like that. And stuff behind things like the Knights Templar and, what did they find in King Solomon's temple and all these sort of things. So with that, I thought, well, what if I could create an alternative to sort of known religions or our own beginnings and where we get our origins of religion from. As we know, a lot of religions have very similarities. They have immaculate conceptions. They have an Adam and Eve type story. They're all very, very similar. We know why some of them are the cases, because obviously some of the major religions borrowed elements from different things like paganism and various pagan organizations, religions. So I thought, what if heaven and hell were places? What if they were two planets that were once one race? And as they expose themselves to different races, like the human race or some of the other races around the sort of known 10 realms that we've created, maybe that's how we envisage what gods were. What if Earth was an inception project that was designed to see how life could evolve if it was untouched, if it wasn't interfered with. What if all the planets were alive and the planets were titans themselves? What if there was a greater picture? What if there was a greater meaning? There was a greater story above our own? And then how would we have our place within that? I think as humans, it's very hard for us to really comprehend the universe and the infinite of how it is infinite. How we just can't comprehend those numbers, those years, and everything else. So I thought I'd write a story where maybe we can consolidate that sort of idea by creating these sort of titans, these planets, these start lines, these timelines, and everything else within it. But what I wanted to focus on was individual stories, not necessarily the bigger picture. So I kind of wanted to look at the idea that if there was a heaven and hell, what would it look like? Could it have been one race, an older, far more ancient race than we are? Could all the titans, could they have tried to make life in their own forms, indicative to themselves? Could they have done that? So the idea was that heaven and hell have been battling, have been fighting over something. And in this case, heaven is a place called Elysia and hell is Abyssia. And they're fighting over what is essentially Eden, Earth, the Inception Project, the sort of the center of the known 10 realms. And the story sort of goes where we've got characters very similar to your sort of Highlanders, where there's people who've lived through the ages and they've got all these experiences and they picked up all this knowledge and information from battling and growing old with the human race. And I think that allows us to really escape into different timelines and different backstories and everything else. While at the same time, we've got this war between good and evil. And then on top of that, then we've got the own problems with the Titans and their troubles and tribulations between themselves and everything else. We've got kind of really lots and lots of big layers. So plenty of stuff to lose ourselves in, but also at the same time, at every stage, there's something that's recognizable about that you could relate to your own ideas and your own fantasies and your own escapism. So it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
I think if you actually went to, if someone got a chance, we've got the backstory written on the website at www.groundhammer.org. You can read the backstory, and it's very much, it's easy enough to digest. It's not as probably as difficult to understand as I've probably made out just then.
Going back to the idea of creativity, have you enjoyed that world building? You're starting with a title, an idea, and you've got to build a world, and an incredibly dense world, if you just described, with a mythos, and then you've got to populate it with characters. Have you enjoyed that part of creating Groundhammer?
Yeah, I have. These, you can go down some serious rabbit holes. I spend a lot of time on Wikipedia and the thesauruses and dictionaries. So, dictionary to find a word that I think I like, then the thesaurus, find another way of describing it. I then use Wikipedia to get some information and then find the words within Wikipedia to best describe it. And you can go down these massive rabbit holes about why you're kind of coming up with these stories. And you've got to be real careful because we've got 10 realms that we're looking at. So it's the Groundhammer and the Defenders of the Realms. Essentially, the Groundhammers is an ancient race, an ancient creed of warriors who were tasked to ensure peace as the one Euclidean race is the reunification of the one Euclidean race, which is heaven and hell. And the Groundhammers were tasked to ensure that that peace goes as the reunification commences. Obviously, it didn't quite go the way things were planned, and next thing you know, essentially the Groundhammers became what is essentially Ronin, and sort of cast across the 10 realms. Either they were hunted down, or others were sort of in hiding. And then there was a few sort of pockets of resistance as well. It's quite difficult to make sure you don't lose yourself and focus too much, too much of a wider picture, because you can lose yourself. I think what you have to do for me is because my head's all over the place, what I have to do is have to focus on one little area at the moment, that one battle, that one kind of piece. Be aware of the wider picture, and then I just leave it. I leave it for a month, 2 months sometimes, and then I come back to it. And that way it doesn't, I think you can come back it with a fresh mind. You can come back with it kind of knowing where you want to go with it, rather than losing yourself down a big rabbit hole. But yeah, as I said, this idea of the Groundhammers being this sort of creed means that I can relate them back to the sort of special forces, the ethos, the mentality, the tenets, and everything else that surrounds the makeup of a special forces soldier, because that's relatable to my background. The wars and the missions are based on topical events, things like pollution, things like COVID, things like child exploitation, greed, everything else that we know is going on. So that's essentially what the operations are about. But the way they're told and the way they're run is through kind of a sci-fi feel. And I think I think that's kind of it in a nutshell. I think anything more than I would be confusing any listener. I think it's probably best just to refer anyone going back to the website, and then they can sort of get the backstory. That's as far as I've taken it. If I go any further, then I'd be absolutely lost. But going back to my point is, what you can find writing a sci-fi story is the fact that you just don't know enough about the detail. So, I mean, how do you then talk about a different planet? And then when you think about a different planet, what does that planet look like? What do the species on that planet look like? What does the topography of that planet look like? What does the known symbols of that planet look like? Where is that planet? And then what is the makeup, the demographic of the people and the characters on that planet? It's really, really, consuming.
Yeah.
So we just have to kind of bring it back to stuff that we kind of know every time, and then sort of slowly build it up. Does that all make sense?
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
Swear to God, I've been smoking them.
So Groundhammer, the first 3 issues are available now, aren't they? Through groundhammer.org?
Yep.
What's
.org, yep. Yeah, groundhammer.org, yep.
What's the plan for the series moving forward? So obviously, we talked about it initially as a means to promote a beer brand, but obviously it's grown its own legs. It's become its own entity. It's actually become a sort of a legitimate comic book series in its own right. I know you've got plans to sort of grow Groundhammer. Tell us a little bit about that.
What's interesting, we actually managed to get in front of the VP for Universal Studios last year. It's a very, very early first initial meeting, just to explain that we've got this concept of a universe, a concept of multi-layered stories with multi-characters from different backgrounds. and obviously the characters are all mega diverse, and the reason why they're diverse is because people in the military are all different flavors and colors and everything else. And that was something that the studio was actually quite interested, or at least the guys from the studio were actually really interested. We haven't really pursued anything further than that because I just don't think we've got enough. So at the moment, it's still a case of building the story, building the layers within that story. So I think we just, at the moment, the first 3 to 4 sagas, the 4th saga will be coming out soon, is building the characters. The 5th saga will be the first mission of the whole team coming together. Concurrently, we're potentially looking at a 40k game to support the storyline. So again, another way of escaping through it. We've obviously had some bikes been built for us. Again, the idea was that people who like motorbikes could also lose themselves into these other kind of projects and things that they get themselves involved in. We've even put the name to a jiu-jitsu dojo that we're opening up here in Hereford. It's a tactical training centre teaching blue light, military, and emergency services, tactical jiu-jitsu to obviously help protect them and make their lives a lot safer. Also, we'll be doing women's classes, kids classes, and opening it to the public. I think the name Groundhammer is just so much fun, and we can do so much with it. But everything that we're doing is going to bring it back to the storyline, bring it back to what we do as a brand, as an idea. And then from there, we can then punch back out and say, well, okay, let's do some beer. Who are we selling it to? We're selling it to the Polish. Okay, let's create like a Pilsner type beer, and let's have a sort of a Polish Grom character within the storyline. Again, it's something that's relatable to them. It's something they can have and they can own, and then they can enjoy the stories of their own guys and girls that have done some amazing things, and we can highlight them and the work that they've done. So I think that's the freedom of movement we have with Groundhammer.
Could there be a more perfect name for a jiu-jitsu gym than Groundhammer? I don't think so. It's
probably not. No. Well, so my mate Andy Roberts, he does a lot of the training for all different organisations. Many I won't say that on this podcast. He's very kindly tomorrow. In fact, we've got Hoist Gracie coming down, who's winner of the UFC 1, 2, and 4. The grandfathers of jiu-jitsu. He's coming down tomorrow. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Groundhammer, what a great name for a jiu-jitsu training venue. I just think I just want to absolutely have as much fun as I possibly can with the name and the comic and everything that we're doing with this project, and bring as many cool people involved in it as we can.
And there's a theme tune, I think, a Groundhammer song.
Yeah. So you can go on Spotify, a band called Kinstrife. The brief was quite simple, really. I just said, so Groundhammer, the hammer is the AC-130 gunship, as I mentioned earlier. It was our guardian angel. It protected us when we were on the ground. Can you basically write a song about the AC-130 gunship and how she protected us? And then they wrote this tune, and it's ace. It's honestly, it's brilliant. It's exactly what it has. It's almost got that sort of 80s kind of feel, but still with a little bit of, I don't know, maybe with a bit of Audio Slave kind of mixed in there as well. It's got it's pretty cool.
It is, yeah. I was trying to think of comparing the sort of who it's like. Yeah, there's a bit of Audio Slave in there. One of my favourite bands. I'd say makes me think of sort of Zakk Wylde and kind of Black Label Society, that kind of thing. Definitely worth checking out.
And the story of the Iron, there's almost like that classic Iron Maiden storytelling side to it as well. And,
definitely.
Yeah, it was good. Actually, they did they did a longer edit, which I actually preferred the longer edit, but obviously they had to shorten it for Spotify, for the radio and a few other things they did. It was. Basically, my kids were sick of hearing it. If I'll be honest.
So we've got the Groundhammer comic. You may have noticed there's a Groundhammer T-shirt. You've got a Groundhammer T-shirt on too. There may be a Groundhammer mug. So no shortage of merch and associated bits and pieces out there. Any other merch coming down the pipeline? Can we expect action figures, statues, posters?
Yeah, I think we'd like to do that once we get the 40K game up and running. I think we'll look to do that. I think we really need to nail down exactly how these characters are going to look and feel going forward.
Mm-hmm.
But I think definitely with the 40K game coming on board, we'll need these figures and everything going into it. Mm-hmm. We do actually do coffee as well. That's kind of we had a number of these products like the T-shirts. We did the coffee, the mugs. A lot of this was created to help fund the project. So by selling coffee and the T-shirts and the merch, was able to put money back into paying for this project to lift off. I mean, we're lucky. I kind of run my own print shop as well, so we're able to run our own T-shirts and apparel through that to keep the cost down. But it's good fun. I love merch. That's kind of where we make most of our money and our livings. So it seemed like a natural thing to do.
Excellent.
And everyone likes to show off their tribe, don't they?
They do.
Just
absolutely.
one on this. So on the Groundhammer as well, when we came up with the logo, the original logo on this was, when we created the beer, was to sort of signify the relationship between the British and the Americans and how we've been fighting side by side since 1917. And the original tagline was "Spilling blood in the same mud since 1917." And so that's how this logo started. And actually the fist is the shape of Orion. So actually, if you look at Orion, the dog-toothed star and the shape of Orion is that sort of shape there, that hourglass shape. So we wanted something that you could look up to the sky, would see a shape that looked familiar. And then in the story, we've written that this is the sign of the Groundhammer. It's actually the shape of this is how you'd be looking at the star constellation from the opposite side, so you're coming towards this way. But yeah, so, and obviously the fist punching down is the Groundhammer. But we've never really kind of lost the Union, Jack and the Stars and Stripes, because I just thought that was kind of how it all started. It was how this sort of big movement and how we went together, certainly since 9/11, how we built up those relationships and how we all sort of lost and we all served and lost people. So there's lots of layered elements of respect and homage to the fallen in this.
So a lot for readers to kind of latch onto and find their way in, whether it's through the military angle and maybe an interest in your background and exploring sort of special forces and the military side. There's also the kind of sci-fi angle coming in from the other angle, but also I think, in reading Groundhammer, this is the depth of the world building and kind of, as you've alluded to already, the sort of the art of the possible, what's to come, those kind of things. And that, I think there's a lot there for Groundhammer for people to buy into. So just remind me again, so Groundhammer, the first 3 issues are available, aren't they? And they're available exclusively on groundhammer.org?
Yeah, they are. Well, I say exclusively. We're also selling them at Q's Comics at the moment. You and I are obviously in talks about looking at potential publishing houses, and obviously self-published at the moment, and obviously other distributors to get it out there. But at the moment, groundhammer.org, or if you're in the local Herefordshire area, then pop into Q's Comics. You can pick up a copy there. Sagas 1, 2, 3, and 4 very much introducing the characters. 4 is in the process of being built, and then 5 will be the sort of finishing part of that first initial introduction, giving the one mission, bringing everyone together in the team. Yeah. Yeah, it's good fun. I think there's lots to go off on Groundhammer that would pick the imagination of many people. As you said, we've got, the space, the sci-fi, the planets, the characters, and everything else from different realms. We've got the history and the ages of history throughout. Sort of Earth and mankind's and the sort of modern history. We've got battles, we've got real life characters, we've got backstories of people. We've even used real world locations to set the scene in some of these cases. The headquarters is based under the Honourable Artillery building in London. Some of the portals in there are real world locations known to be throughout history, known in certain religions to be the gateways to heaven and hell. And I love the idea of using these places that through different religions have been known to be the gateway to hell or the gateway to heaven. Maybe that's why they're called portals. Maybe they are real portals. That's the idea of doing this. And also, if they're real world locations, then maybe if someone ever goes there, then maybe just like whatever the platform is in Harry Potter, the amount of people that probably stand on that platform and still think, I wonder, and that's the idea, is maybe you could just wonder. Quick one. Do you remember watching Excalibur? Remember the 80s Excalibur film about
John Borman?
Yeah. That's it. And Helen Mirren. And remember they were sort of round Stonehenge, and Merlin was there around Stonehenge and everything else. I love the idea that even when I went to Stonehenge, I thought, I wonder if Merlin is under. Well, then you find out that actually all the stones on Stonehenge were actually pulled up and then relayed with concrete and put back in again. But you still think, what if? You go to these locations, don't you? And you kind of lose yourself in what if. And I like the idea of that. So that's why we brought that into the comic.
And that's really interesting you say that. There's a subset, I think it's a subset of manga comics from Japan where they've been set in real world locations. And those real world locations have become tourist attractions because they're in this immensely popular series of comic books. So, it could be somewhere like Leominster, but because it's, in this comic book and it's mega popular, suddenly Leominster has become this massive tourist attraction for people going, I must go there because it featured in this comic. I think people would be massively disappointed if they got to Leominster expecting to see the comic.
Yeah.
It's
well, we want to use it's I'm kind of giving things away here a little bit, but I as I said, what captured my imagination a few years ago when I as I said, I'm not actually a practicing Freemason anymore. I just can't commit to it. I'm very proud to be associated, and probably at heart I still am. But the reason why I joined it is because I wanted to know the origins of religion, or at least our religion. I also love the idea of looking at things like standing stones and sort of old British paganism and stuff like that. So actually, I'm really looking forward to kind of bringing standing stones and known locations into the story that we could use as things like caches, or where certain things were hidden or certain things were identified. And in the military, we use a caching system in the military where we were given a known location or a known spot. We would go to that spot and then we would be given cardinal points from there and then paces away. And that's where you would do things like live letterboxes and dead letterboxes. So when people are leaving you stuff, or you're leaving stuff for someone else. And I love sort of I like the idea of bringing how we operate and how we conduct operations into the storyline, but still doing it in a way that it's intrinsic to the story, as opposed to, you'll go to a occasion, there'll be like a spaceship there or something. It's not that. It's still kind of using that there might be something left for you or whatever. But ideally, I was thinking, could I actually use real caches? And then I'd be worried, well, if I was lucky enough for the comic to be quite successful, you don't want people going digging up some standing stone in the middle of some farmer's field. I was just going to say that standing stones around the UK have always been surrounded by mystery and everything else. So again, isn't that something you could lose yourself into? Why is that there? How come it stayed there? How come it was never moved, or has it moved? All these there's so much stuff that we grew up with that kept our minds running at a million miles an hour. Why can't it be our time to write a story? Why couldn't it be us that makes up the next bit of bull?
That's it. So, Ben, I think unless there's anything else you want to cover off, we'll wrap it up there. But just remind me again. So, for Groundhammer merch, for the comic, for Groundhammer coffee, we're groundhammer.org.
And also a little bit of the backstory. There's also stuff on the website there that gives you the layered stuff about the storyline. So again, you can go in there and look at why we've created certain things, constellations. We've looked at, for example, there's a planet called Duoluna, which obviously means two moons. The planet was the two moons were scorched as they went past the dog star, Sirius. So that basically gave that magnified their power as moons, which meant that actually the inhabitants of Duoluna are possessed with the power of those moons. That's very much so. There's sort of things like that in there, which we've used real things to kind of bring this into. There's obviously also backstories about individuals onto the website as well, so you can learn about real people like Matt Lloyd. Matt Lloyd, who is actually Lloyd Newell, and Matt Tunro, two SAS guys who were killed. So you can learn about these guys and stuff like that. So, yeah, there's lots of stuff on the website. Instagram, really easy, @groundhammer_.
So we'll say goodbye to the readers now, Ben. So, Ben, thanks ever so much for joining us here. Really appreciate the time. Best of luck with Groundhammer. Best of luck with QCon and everything that's going on there. Best of luck with HR4K and also the excellently named Groundhammer Jiu-Jitsu Gym. So, folks, if you fancy getting into Jiu-Jitsu and if you live in the Hereford area, by all means, drop by and get ground hammered. I think that's going to be a new slogan, maybe. And also, what was the name of the band who did the Groundhammer theme tune?
Kinstrife.
Groundhammer song. And that's on Spotify,
Brilliant.
iTunes?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, Spotify. Yeah, you can get it on Spotify. Just type in Groundhammer, you'll find the song, or type in Kinstrife, either way.
Brilliant. Ben, huge thanks for your time. Folks, thanks very much for joining. We'll see you next time.